Angela Petina presents. It's an honor. In my show, we concentrate to support the independent artists, outside from the elites. We were talking about
Right.
yes, to make a difference. And but first of all, I want to say thank you, both of you, again for being my show, and also William, because we are like I said at the beginning, we are friends. We chat almost every day, and we are friends almost since sadly when Michael Jackson passed. I found about you that when you you attended trial 2005, and actually you were one of the first to announce his innocence. But actually, there's another video that we spoke specifically what happened at the trial. But now, congratulations for the book release, The Hardest Year, a love story and letters during the Vietnam War. I don't want to get to my spoils because I want to encourage the audience from United Kingdom, because most people I interviewed from filmmakers, United Kingdom, now in United States, and also in Latin America, to pay attention to read your book, because there's a lot of story, and this story about your relationship, the struggles that actually happens between 1 year, 1968, 1969, when that time there was no internet, no WhatsApps, nothing, and how to maintain a relationship. Exactly, nothing.
No cell phones.
Yes, and this is I want to call this is a piece of jewelry, your book, because when I was reading the first 3 chapters, congratulations, Carole, because your dialogue, you're engaging too much to the reader, and it's not a book like you start reading the first 3 sentences, you start you're really connected reader. I can give you me as a witness. My husband, he the same. Very beautiful, and not only that, you're giving the actual story. You start like a connecting. Imagine when you were listening to the radio, and then when William, if he won't be able to, just a piece, he passed university, and then he has no choice, he has to enroll to the military. Those little things that I don't want to discuss too much. I want to give it to you because you're more the right person, and it's a piece of art, and also was pieces of the history inside. Okay, congratulations. First of all, who was the person, who was the master idea to come up with the idea to write this book?
Well,
You.
she claims to be the writer of the book, but it's based on the letters I saved, which over the last 54 years, she'd say, "Oh, throw those out."
Only
Just
one time I said
throw-
throw them out.
One time in Wisconsin, she said, "Oh, why are you saving those old letters? Throw them out. We have no room for them." Then we got to California, and I'm still saving them, and I'm collecting them, putting them in shoeboxes. And she's, "Oh, throw those
I
out."
did not.
No.
They're in the garage. That's
They're-
fine.
Well, we still
So-
got them back there in the garage, but the idea I had was I collect history. I want to know what the truth is. So it occurred to me, maybe my grandchildren's grandchildren might want to read something actually written by me when I was in the war, and written by Carole back to me in the war, because we were fighting. We'd only been married 3 days when I left for Vietnam. And there were times we didn't think we were going to make it as a married couple, because we had some.
There still are some times
There's
we
still
don't know how
sometimes
we
we're not
made it.
sure.
But let me answer the question.
I
Okay.
did.
No, you didn't.
I did.
That's your version. Now my version. So what happened is I joined this California Writers Club, and we have a local branch about 5 miles from here. called-
About 5 years ago, she joined.
It was
Mhm.
actually more like 8 years. Before I even started writing, I joined this club, and once a month I would go and we'd have a lecture, and I was learning just that way. I wasn't really doing writing, but I thought I might like to write. So after this book took 7 years to write. So one day I came home from the meeting on a Saturday, and that Saturday we had an author who wrote a book based on Aldous Huxley's letters. Now he wrote Brave New World, and I read that in college. We even talk about it in the book. It was popular back then. And this author knew his daughter, and the daughter didn't want her dad's letters, so she gave them all to this author, who then made a book. And her father had known this author very well. He would go to their house and spend the time with them. So the same day I came home, he comes out of the garage carrying this shoebox of letters and says, "What do you want to do with these letters?" And I said, "Give them to me. I think we could write a book." So that's how the book, it was kind of a coincidence. We've had a lot of coincidences like that, where the timing was just perfect. So had I not gone to the lecture and heard about making a book out of letters, had he not brought the box in from the garage that day, had he brought it in, a year sooner, I wouldn't know what to do with the letters. So I actually sat down and I started to put them in chronological order. Now, on the book, you can actually see some of the envelopes. And when he got to Vietnam, he didn't have to put a stamp on it. It was free. He would write free in the corner. So there were no postmarks.
This is one of the few privileges of being a GI in a combat zone.
So then
you
I
didn't have to look for a post office to buy a stamp. You just wrote free.
Then I had to actually open all the letters and read them and get the dates and put them in chronological order. I couldn't just go by postmarks. So that took me about a year, I think. And my first story was just the letters. I thought I could weave them together and tell the story. And my girlfriend read it and she said it was rather boring. So I have to try plan B now. Plan A didn't work. So that would have been so easy. So that's why it's taken like 7 years to refine it and get all the stories. And plus the first year I did a lot of research and read other books about Vietnam, because I didn't even know the basic geography. Or
she didn't know the Vietnam geography. She just knew it was someplace far away on the other side of the planet. She didn't even know common military terms. I had to explain them to her because it wasn't an issue in our letters. I didn't write the things we took for granted in Vietnam weren't obvious to a civilian. And she never saw Vietnam. She was never there with me. So a lot of these terms didn't make sense. So she had to spend time researching. And eventually when she couldn't find it, she'd just ask me.
No, but what a beautiful idea, Carole, collecting, even yours and other people, combining, because at the end of the day, everybody at that time experienced the similar, they experience the same, they live the same experience. And, it's the actual story, it's not twisted like we got from the book. It's actually how you guys live that moment. And sometimes when that years pass, you didn't realize how was back in the story, how was your life previously, until you come out, you reconnected real life in, all the episodes that both of you live. So that's beautiful. That's fantastic.
So what we did in the book is we had this line drawing, and it's a picture of South Vietnam. And I had a map that Bill sent me, and I would follow him around based on the cities. But, he was in a very rural area. And on this map, there's a little star. So he's like in the Central Highlands. And it's such a small area that I don't even know that it's on the maps today, the Cha Rang Valley. So we did that. And then my friend told me, with all these military terms, to put a glossary of terms in the back, so that the reader can find them. And actually, I put a warning, if you have PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome, you might not be comfortable reading parts of this book, or all of it. But
especially for those people who suffer that, to be part of the military or be a family member, close family member, someone, is understandable, having those kind of traumatic, because it's not easy.
I had in the original writings, I had footnotes on the bottom of the pages, and I could add a little more historic information without taking away from the story. But my editor said, put them all at the end of the book. So that way it's not distracting when you're reading. You'll see a little like number 1, 2, or 3 sometimes in the text that refers to the end note. And you can go back and look it up then, or you can read them at the end of the book or not read them at all. But that way I was able to incorporate things like military publications that explained why they had to use napalm, that deadly napalm, why they had to use that. The Vietnamese had a whole series of tunnels underneath. They put that in when the French were there, right?
Oh yeah, if you go to Vietnam today, and there's a magazine called Veterans Breakfast Club, and I recommend you look up Veterans Breakfast Club if you're interested in understanding those sort of things. The Vietnamese have been fighting nonstop for more than 1,000 years. And if you go to Vietnam today, I'm told, according to the Veterans Breakfast Club magazine, and talk to the Vietnamese, they don't call it the Vietnamese War. They've always been at war. They were at war with us. They call that the American time, the American War. Before that, it was the French War, because the French were colonialists trying to keep it as a colony. And the irony of it is, nobody had to die, because a man named Ho Chi Minh, which people under 40 today wouldn't know who that was, he was a guy fighting for a unified, independent Vietnam, independent of the French, independent of the Chinese. And they were at war with the Chinese for more than 500 years before the French came. So this book, The Hardest Year, has helped me, even though I only wrote a few pages in it. And that we think is the advantage, because this is a book about Vietnam, but not told from purely the soldier's point of view. It's told from the little woman he left behind, who's wondering if I'm going to come back in a body bag and be buried, or if I'm going to come back alive. And these issues are in the back of her head, and she's trying to stay positive in her letters. And I think mostly she did. Once in a while, she would write an angry letter, and I would rip it up, and those letters didn't survive.
Sometimes I tore them up before I sent them, but when an author writes a book, one of the things we have to do is look for other books that are on the market that might be comparable to this book, and books that have been written like in the last 5 years, and not use books that were written like 35 years ago. Now, The Things They Carried is a very famous book about the Vietnam soldiers. My daughter had to read it in high school, but that book is fiction. It's probably based on a lot of reality, but he changed it around, and it reads like nonfiction. So what I was trying to do was find books that were nonfiction written in the last 5 years. And I did find one called by Andrew Weiss, called Charlie Company's Journey Home: The Forgotten Impact of Vietnam on the Wives and Families of Veterans. But this Andrew Weiss is a professor at the University of Southern Mississippi, and he wrote another book called The Boys of 67, which got turned into a documentary. And so he kept following this group of young men that was a company. They all went to Vietnam together, which is a little unusual. Like usually, like when William went, he was just by himself filling in for someone else who'd gone back home or gotten killed. So he followed these people, and one day he was at a funeral for one of the veterans, and one of the wives said to him, what about us? No one's written a book about us. You think the Vietnam veteran was forgotten about. What about his family and his children? So he went back and he interviewed all of the women that were still alive. And in his book, there are some letters. And I was able to call Professor Wieston. I wanted to use this quotation. Maybe I could read it.
Sure, of course.
The Vietnam War, a war that she had never served in or been to, was the single most important event of her life. So you see, there were a lot of people that were affected by the war. And then that doesn't count the young men that went to Canada. There were like over 50,000 men, draft dodgers, who went to Canada. We had 58,000 soldiers killed in Vietnam, which is a huge number.
Mhm.
But we also had 50,000 draft dodgers who physically left our country. And many of them were college educated, because after 4 years of college, you lost your student deferment. Even if you wanted to go on and get a master's or a master's or a PhD, you were no longer, you were draft material as soon as you graduated from college. Sorry about this. Get out of here. So, you know, you could even, I mean, some of these college educated men, they ended up in the infantry, you know? And
That's what I wanted to avoid, is ending up in infantry. I wasn't born stupid.
but
And
you don't have a choice if they,
yeah, if they draft you, you go do whatever they tell you. So I enlisted, as you'll find out if you read the whole book, under what they called an option.
Mhm.
I enlisted to be a helicopter pilot because I figured that'll be a useful thing. I always wanted to be a helicopter pilot. And when the war is over, I'll be able to fly helicopters. Well, I didn't realize until one day I was in the 160th headquarters company uh, typing something for, because I was one of the few people in my unit that could type. So they pulled me off my regular duty and stuck me in there. And in comes a magazine. Which one was it? Look,
Life
Life
magazine.
magazine came out with an issue and it said 1 week's dead in Vietnam, something like title like that. And I thought, wow, we're not even supposed to see stuff that looks negative about the war. And here it is right here and way out in the boonies where I am. So I started reading and said, oh, I know that guy. I went to training with that guy. I was in helicopter training with that guy and that guy and that guy and that guy. And I thought, oh my God, there was 100 and some dead that week. Half of them I personally knew. They'd been in training with me. And that's when it dawned on me. I was so blessed by God that I washed out of helicopter training.
This is a book about my perspective of the war. I did not go to Vietnam. I never set a foot on the soil there. You know, I'm in college. I'm under a lot of stress too, because
it's a good book because you get the female side.
That's exactly
yes, and think very original, because this is, you know, this we can hear stories, you know, people like you, William, that you were in the war, and you people, other people like in the same generation, being it's you know, living that experience is, you know, not easy, it's not very common, especially with surviving, because like you say, how many people they lost their job, their life, they get sick, they get, you know, for many reasons, and the true story is you're alive thanks to you. But like Carol says, now to see the other side of the story, woman, the on people that couldn't be able to attend the war, but they lost their brothers, father, and things like that. That's I think it's also a beautiful, you know, and wonderful idea to share to the public, and not twist stories, because it's the same thing. No matter what side of the story, sadly, the elite, they like to change it by making their own story where it's totally different. And yes,
when you finish the book, or if you don't finish it, go to the epilogue, which is after the last chapter, and it explains how we came around to be very anti-war because we see the truth. And we talked about the Iraq War and a demonstration we went to. we had a picture. This was in Santa Barbara. You see all those crosses in the sand?
Yes, yes.
At that point in Iraq, we'd lost 3,000 soldiers. And actually, I think totally we lost about 4,400, which is almost nothing compared to Vietnam, you know. But
we are still losing from the Vietnam War. I went to call my cousin Chuck Overbeck because I met him in Vietnam, not knowing where he was. When I was in Vietnam, he was in Vietnam. I had to travel quite a distance to go find him. And we had a picture taken, which was published in the Door County Advocate in '69. I went to call him, what was this, last week or the week before? Just very recently. He's dead. I didn't know he died. I talked to him, 4 or 5 years ago?
Maybe 2 years ago, I found him. I found one of his sons on Facebook, which is usually how I find people. And then his son gave us Chuck's number. He was living in Texas. And I asked him, do you ever keep contact with your buddies? And Chuck was in a water purification program. And he said, no. He said, all the guys in my unit died of Agent Orange.
He was in a water purification training, but
they were right there.
He was in a combat. They were sending him out every day to do combat, which has got little or nothing to do with water purification.
So a lot of veterans today are getting cancers.
And Chuck died.
15 diseases that are caused now by Agent Orange.
And he died from leftover effects of Agent Orange, which
we finally found him. And then he's dead.
But he's dead.
I mean, if you can't find somebody on Facebook, my sister told me, look in the obituaries. And I actually found this guy that I dated in junior high. I call him Tom in the book. And so it was kind of cool to read his obituary and find out, he had 7 children. He got 3 degrees. He was really smart. I knew he was smart because he had a large head. And I stared at him a lot. I stared at the back of his head. I always sat right behind him and he ignored me. But anyways, eventually he asked me out and we talk about that in one of the chapters. And
something she forgot to mention to me when we were dating. 55 years later, she dated Tom.
But he wanted me to date. If you read the letters, he was encouraged me before we got married.
I didn't think I was going to, in Vietnam, I wasn't sure I was going to come back alive.
Well, what was really interesting too is I was working in a little Hispanic restaurant. We call it a Mexican food. And I learned how to make a taco, and Mrs. Cordova made this wonderful chili. I don't even know. It had big chunks of pork and beef in it. Yeah. So word of mouth got out and people started coming to this little restaurant. And who walks in one day but Tom? And I think my jaw almost dropped. I thought I'd seen him there once before leaving. And sure enough, he came in, he asked me out on a date. He was real nice to me, very talkative. But anyway, he's still jealous. Anyways,
I'm jealous of a dead man.
What could have been? I could have had 7 children instead of 5.
Oh my God.
One cute little story. But the other thing I'm doing, Angela, is I'm writing a screenplay.
That's yes, good.
Yes. So I joined another organization.
It's a spin-off on the book.
It's a spin-off. I decided to Hollywoodize it before Hollywood got their hands on it. But I joined another organization called Military Writers Society of America because I found 2 other female authors through my UW Wisconsin alumni magazine. And one was an Iraq War veteran. And so I found Laura Colbert on Facebook and I connected through Facebook. It's like the easiest way. You private message that you can call. And then I met another lady from Green Bay, which is where we're from. And she had 35 letters of her brother was a journalist student in Madison. And when he graduated, he got drafted or enlisted. So he ended up closer to the rubber plantations, closer to the Cambodia or Laos border.
She doesn't know the terrain.
I don't know
of
the
Vietnam,
terrain real well.
but the
but-
south was more swampy, and the southern part, way south, I never got there.
So
I was never down near Saigon or Long Binh except once, in and out in the night, and I didn't really see anything.
So after
Um,
he passed away, her mother made her promise on her mother's deathbed that she would do something with those 35 letters. They kept them in a safe. So Annette Grunset, she took the letters, and she is a poet. So she put her brother's letter and then a poem about her brother growing up. And one of them, he takes a pear. Kids played soldiers back then. They had soldier games. And he would take a pear and pull the stem off and pretend it was a hand grenade. And so she wrote a poem about that. Like, I can never eat a pear anymore without thinking of my brother, you know. And she actually won a silver medal from the Military Writers Society of America. So what we can do is, when we get our real books, this is a reader's version, I can submit it to a contest and try to get a silver or a bronze or a gold medal. And I believe that the other lady, the Iraq War veteran, she wrote her book based on her journal. She won a bronze medal, which is like third place. And so I'm hoping that I can do that maybe next year. This year they've already had all their submissions, but they'll put me on a waiting list. So we have
That's
that
good.
to look forward to, and to book content.
So do you have any
My next-
production or director in mind, or are you planning just to offer to
Oh.
see someone?
Well, you mean as far as the screenplay? Well, as it ended up, the Military Writers Society had a free screenwriting class. So I took it, because these classes can cost $1,000 to $2,000 each. And it's a topic I didn't know anything about. So I signed up for it, and my teacher is a fellow named Edward Pomerantz, who wrote for Law and Order, and he's very good. And then one of the other guys that I'd met who taught a memoir class, Tom Avidable, he's a thriller author. He did the blurb on the back of my book. He ended up in my screenwriting class too. And so they're helping me. And then about halfway through my screenwriting program, Ed was thinking, he goes, I think Carole needs to take a lover. And she needs to have two men in her life. One who is the hero soldier, and the other one who's very opposite. So what I did is I took Tom from chapter 2 or whatever. I brought him back. I hadn't introduced him in the movie yet. So I changed the beginning where I introduced Tom, and I introduced him as the ugly man, that contest he was in.
That's true. It actually was an ugly man contest, and it's in the book.
In the book. And that's kind of how we met. He scared the heck out of me. He still does sometimes. So anyways, I brought Tom back as Carole's love interest. I changed Carole's name to Carissa, and Tom is an anti-draft dodger, and he helps bring men up to Canada.
So I'm just another John in the script.
But he really did work for the Madison Police Department, trying to find.
Well, I didn't get a salary.
We volunteered.
I was a volunteer because I objected to people destroying private property. And the rioters weren't happy. They weren't happy just to hold signs, scream, yell, and disrupt business. They would smash windows. One of the interesting things, I don't know if it's going to be in a script. One of the interesting things, I followed this one kid who did a lot of damage. And I followed him way out of Madison, out into the suburbs, and got a good look at him several times. The police brought me a book. It said, can you pick him out? And I looked and said, I think it's this guy.
A yearbook.
It was a high school yearbook, but they didn't bring me his junior or senior yearbook. They brought me his freshman yearbook, and he changed a lot from his freshman to his senior year. So I couldn't positively identify him in a 3-year-old picture. But I was pretty sure that was the kid. And he turned out to be a policeman's son, a Madison policeman's son. And I think they knew that. And that's why they didn't want to give me a recent yearbook where I would have definitely, picked him out. Because, in high school, you're going through puberty and, from your freshman to your senior year, you change quite a bit.
So I
That
took,
was interesting. That's a true detail.
so I took a lot of the book and fiction and used the same incidents, like getting tear gassed on a motorcycle.
That was real.
Yeah, I imagine when you tracked that kid down, you were on your motorcycle. You're going to
No,
follow
I
him.
was on foot.
You followed him all the
I
way
followed him on
across
foot.
town. Well, anyways, in the movie, I have a chase scene where he's chasing down Tom, who's on a Harley with his little super sport Honda, trying to get a picture of him. And when he would go out on these spy missions, I call them, he had this old trench coat. I don't know if that was from the military or not. And he had a goatee, and he had this, his hair is really long and curly, like it is on the cover of the book. And so he could kind of blend in like he was a hippie, right? But he would carry his camera everywhere. And in the chase scene, he's trying to get a picture of Tom to turn it into the police. But he doesn't, because Tom outsmarts him.
Really? Tom, I got the lady. I got the woman. Who's the smartest guy? I got the woman. Tom didn't get her. I got her.
All fiction, but that's a different story.
That's a different story.
We'll see if it sells,
Yes.
First, we got to get the book out.
We got to get the book out. And right across, these are the letters pinned up in the front here. It's hard to see, but these are the actual letters we put in the front. And there's a pair of my boots.
These are his actual combat boots on the back.
My actual combat boots.
So what our Tom Avidable said about the book, he said, it's a personal snapshot of the turbulent 1960s as framed through the hearts of two souls divided by a war that would ultimately divide a country. An engrossing memoir of the struggle to hold a marriage together, highlighted by the actual contemporaneous exchanges of love, anger, despair, and hope of two people trying to maintain balance as the world was literally shifting beneath their white nursing shoes and muddy combat boots. So, and my daughter and I actually designed the cover, and I hired, I hired a gentleman that has a business to help people like me to self-publish. And so he hooked me up with a cover design lady who's in South America. And she took my original cover, which was the picture with the letters. She put the letters on a clothesline. She changed the colors. She put I had the black on top, the green on the bottom. She changed the colors, and then she added the helicopters. That tells you this story is about Vietnam, right?
Exactly.
And the only thing I changed, I asked her to add a little clothespin because the line continues through here. So I told her to put a little clothespin on the back here. And she added the shoes and boots. So
that's beautiful.
We hit it up. We didn't really make hardly any changes to the cover.
I hope you find time to finish reading it on Kindle.
Yes, of course. And I love the history. And this is, like I said to you, I like to see the actual living experience stories. I'm not follow what is the elite, regular accessible book information like we can find in any library. I like, the alternative. Same thing for news. You know how I am in that sense. Yes. And then, for example, I can, when at times I can have a conversation with someone and they want to talk exclusively about Vietnam, I can add this information, add to my knowledge about this history, because like I said to you, it's very differently just watch any documentary provided by Discovery Channel, just give it just a name, and they can manipulate and say whatever they want to excuse to do additional wars. Ukraine is one of the examples. Iraq is another example. And also for people to understand and respect the veterans. Not only the people who attend the war, but also the relatives, the wives, the children who suffer. Many of them, they still don't know what happened with their spouses. Some of them, they lost their spouses later on by chronic disease. In not only Vietnam, even current now, and sadly, I can say that I don't see too much respect. People appreciate heroes like you, because both of you are heroes. You attending the war and you supporting all the traumatic, all the stress. It's not easy. So my respect to both of you and anyone. They are veterans and they are serving the military, no matter which country they belong. They are defending their country, but sadly, the bankers, the elites, they're using the people for their own purposes. But at the end of the day, the intention to fight and defend the country means the world.
I never used to wear my veterans hat. It's out in the car. I never used to wear it much, but now once in a while I'll wear my hat. Keep my head warm when it's cold and windy, but also people will come to me and say, "Oh, thank you for your service." And that gives me a chance to tell them my real service started after the war.
And like you said in the description, even you use a lot of military terminology. That's making more, realistic, more to live in the moments that people like you, you experience, but other people, I'm pretty sure that will be connected with your story, and also with no language limitation. Exactly what happened, it is what it is. And also I have a question to you, William. You said that you're still suffering for the traumatic trauma with a PSD, difficult for me to pronounce. Do you feel that after, yes, that one, yes. Do you feel after you finish your wife and you collaboration with her, finish this book, do you think there's some relief that you could be able to release some of the traumatic symptoms that you're suffering? Because I'm thinking that maybe
That's a good
this book
question,
can be,
Angela.
yes, because I'm thinking this book can be a good therapy for other people.
I've gotten mental counseling for my post-traumatic stress syndrome, PTSD. I got about the max they could give me under their procedures. I don't know, was it 20 years ago, Carol?
Yes, it was 7 years of counseling.
And I just did another year. I just ended another year for a reason I'm not going to go into. And I was driving back from Santa Barbara on a shortcut called Highway 154 just last week. And there was a bad accident. And there were 100 cars, and then there was 200 cars stopped on the road. There was no way to get around. So I got out of my car and I walked up to the hill. I looked, I could see bodies on the road. I couldn't stand still. Everybody else could just sit in their car and wait. I couldn't sit there and wait. And it wasn't until I got nervous and said, I got to get out of here. I got to move. And then I backtracked all the way back to Santa Barbara and went the long way and got home sooner than people that were still stuck there. And I realized why. And I think because of getting the book done, and maybe a little bit because I got another extra year of counseling, it clicked. The reason I always have to pass people when I don't need to pass them, or I've got to hurry all the time, is because when I went from my base in Shirang Valley to Pleiku Air Base or to Quin Yan, I was usually driving a Jeep with no protection at all. And usually I had my rifle and 1 or 2 clips of ammo, but snipers would shoot at you sometimes, shoot at me. And I stopped one time to help somebody who had stopped. And when he stopped, he got shot by a sniper. And I stopped to help him, and then I got shot at. And I pulled out and went to Phuket and called it in that there's, a dead guy, American. And I think there was 2 Republic of Korea guys there too, but they had got out and chased the sniper. And one of them, I think, was wounded. But anyway, the point is, I finally recognized why I speed every chance. That's why I got a Tesla X, and I go 100 miles an hour when I don't need to. I could be fine doing 65 or 70. And it dawned on me just last week, I can't stand to be a sitting target. If I stop, I'm out of the war. The war is over. It may start again. We may have an American civil war to get rid of Biden, but
I remember when he came home, he couldn't stand to stop at a red light. So he'd get in the right lane, he'd make a right turn, then he'd make a left turn, then he'd come back to the street, go around the block, and then make another right turn.
I keep going the same way,
to
but
get through the red light.
to get through, I couldn't stop. I couldn't. I just.
They
was
have
just-
like the Iraq War veterans, the same thing. They went right through stop signs. They never stopped. If they were driving, they just plowed through the stop sign. They had to actually teach these people how to drive when they got back to the States. You don't run a red light. You don't run a stop sign. You got to stop.
I got a little ticket up near Sacramento about 2 years ago. I never paid it, of course, but the officer wrote me out a ticket. All it was is I was going through a little village, and the traffic slowed down. I slowed down, and then the guy ahead of me, 2 cars ahead of me, stopped. And I'm sitting there like, oh, come on. There's like hardly any traffic. It's just a small town. And then I pulled to the right and went around him because there was room. There was parking spaces nobody was parking in. And just as I get alongside of him, I see he's texting on his cell phone with the left turn. And then he decided not to make a left turn. So I sped up and got ahead of him, took off. Policeman chased me like 5 miles out of that village before he caught up to me. And I wasn't even speeding at that point. I just couldn't sit still. I just couldn't. And, it wouldn't have harmed me to sit there for another 30 seconds for this old guy. I'm an old guy, but he was, even older with white hair, and he's trying to manipulate his cell phone and do something. And then he gave up trying to make a left turn and went straight just as I pulled in front of him. So I recognized finally why I do that. And since then, it's not as bad. I can tell myself I'm not in a war. There's no snipers off on the side of the road on the hilltop going to shoot me. I have to tell myself that so that I can relax and drive normal.
And the other thing that can trigger the PTSD, I found out, is sounds. So like this week we had a Chinook. We had a Chinook helicopter come into the base. Is about 20 minutes from here.
Vandenberg Air Force Base.
Space base, they call
And
it.
it's also space base
So
now.
I didn't hear the helicopter, but we went out to a Chinese place for lunch, and he sat down and he had a strange look on his face. I said, "What's wrong?" He said, "I had a flashback of Vietnam." Well, probably as we were coming into the restaurant, he heard the helicopter.
She didn't even notice.
My hearing's not so good. But then yesterday I said, "Oh yes, I saw the Chinook helicopter flying away." I said, "That's what you heard." And that brought back an instantaneous memory. So
Yes.
sounds are very
Chinooks-
triggering, they call it.
When I heard Chinooks in Vietnam, really bad stuff was happening. People were getting killed all around me, or the aftermath, they were carrying the bodies out on Chinooks, or they were bringing more soldiers in to fight the battle. And it brings me to a very specific place and time, and though I don't remember the date in my head, that all comes flooding back. We're just having lunch, and she couldn't hear it, but I heard it in the distance. And it just,
And
to this
that's
day, it triggers me. If I hear a Chinook is that
the one with the double blades.
it's got a double
Yes,
chopper
yes.
thing, and it's used to carry troops and small jeeps and stuff. And it takes me a very specific place and time in my memory. And I have to remind myself, I'm not there, I'm here. And
Yes,
so you
yes.
find out things you were over it. It was in the past. It damages you in a way you never really. And I remember my mother had an uncle, Noah Desjardins, and he used to run a gas station in Sturgeon Bay in Door County, Wisconsin. And then he left when he came back from World War I, and he lived alone in a cabin. Left his wife and his daughter and lived alone in a cabin in Idaho. And my mother spoke so well of him. I went out there, drove out there and found him one day. And he would only talk to me from a distance. And I told him who I was, how we're related. And now looking back, I see he was suffering severe post-traumatic stress syndrome. He had to live alone in the woods, couldn't even raise his daughter, couldn't live with his wife. He couldn't be around family. He just lived alone until he died.
Back then they called it shell shock.
They called it shell shock or battle
Over
fatigue.
Battle
Can
fatigue.
you imagine
And
how
it-
many people are millions and many
Millions.
people? Yes, yes. Yes,
thing
and
about-
this, yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thing about PTSD, if he were to have gotten the counseling right away, which
Mhm.
we tried to get him counseling in Madison, and the counselor wasn't specialized in it. And he just said, "Oh, if you survived Vietnam, you're doing
You're
good."
fine, you survived, you're
Dismissed
fine.
us after a couple of visits. But the longer you wait to treat it, the more counseling you need. So by
Exactly.
waiting, and they didn't have it for the Vietnam vets, which is why we have so many homeless vets.
We have a lot of homeless Vietnam vets.
And then the doctor that treated him said, this is why it took so long. It's now 30 years ago, 30 years past, took 7 years of counseling, where perhaps if he had had counseling right away in 1 or 2 years, he would have understood what to do, some breathing exercises, maybe
Mhm.
take a walk. If you're feeling angry or tense, get out of that situation, But,
Mhm.
a lot of it is understanding, and medication doesn't. Maybe some anti-anxiety medication or something.
Yes.
Medication doesn't really help.
Medication doesn't help.
It's counseling.
Doesn't
and getting
help.
it
And what
together with
about you? Yes. And what about you, Carol? Do you think that you have the post-traumatic issue too? Like it's affecting, because I can imagine living the stress every day, every single day, because you know how women, especially women, our mind flies so fast and making our own stories and thinking the worst. Living that constantly. I can imagine all the nights you couldn't be able to sleep, worry about it, Do you think you suffer that as well, but a different side, but kind of?
Me or Carol?
Me.
Carol, yeah.
What I tried to avoid was anything that might get him angry, where he would blow up at me, So I kind of learned I could only push so far. And then I had to back off because I didn't want him getting angry, because that didn't help the situation at all. So I had to learn to work around his anger. But
It was difficult raising all the children I had.
Kids.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like we had to walk on eggshells. As he had trouble sleeping, we recognize now looking back, he would have trouble sleeping. So some days he had to sleep until noon. He wouldn't get up till noon because he couldn't work but part-time. And so I had to keep little children quiet in the house till like 12 o'clock, lunchtime.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're walking around on eggshells because if we woke him up, he would be angry.
Mm-hmm.
But we didn't know what we were dealing with until
I had
years
nightmares
later.
for years. I had nightmares that would wake me up, and I would, even when I woke up, I thought I was in battle.
So
Or I thought I'd just been attacked on top of my guard post when I had guard duty on top of a guard post. And the nightmares were so real.
Mm-hmm.
I'd wake up screaming, yelling, get down, get in the ditch, or get some ammo or something. And I'd be awake. And then I'd take a few minutes to realize, oh, I'm home. I'm in the bedroom. I'm not, and see this kind of, our society does not recognize mental wounds very well. If you get your arm blown off, yeah, oh, he's wounded in the war. He's got no left arm. Or you lose a leg. It's obvious where the wound is. But the mental wounds can last a lot longer. And it's just, I think if I hadn't married Carole, who was a physical therapist, and I didn't have a brother who was a doctor, I probably would have committed suicide 30, 40 years ago. It was just really, really difficult.
So what happened, Angelina, and it's in the book toward the beginning. He came home from Vietnam like the end of August of 1969. And one of the reasons he got out a little early is so he could start college in September. Because I think his 2 years were actually up in October. So we got an early out and he barely got a break. He had a week off and we're back at school. So we moved back to Madison, down to Madison. And one morning I woke up and he was screaming and he was panicking and I could not get him out of the dream. And he was back in Vietnam, get my rifle. He was out of it and I couldn't get him out. I couldn't get him back to reality. And I felt his forehead. He had a fever, like, I don't even know how high his fever was. So I knew I had to get him to the hospital. So I got him to take a little drink of water. Then he settled down. He went back to sleep. And that was our first sign of PTSD. But they didn't call it PTSD back then. We didn't know nothing. Okay. So I got him to the hospital.
I don't remember going to the hospital, but I remember they stuck a needle in my back, in my spine.
Well, they thought he might have had,
that was really painful.
First, the doctor said he might have had malaria from Vietnam. And that was pretty scary because he'd only been home like 4 weeks. And they gave him anti-malaria pills. When he got home, he had to take some medication. So I figured, okay, it's probably not that. He said he could have meningitis. He had such a high fever. And so they had to do a spinal tap. And he had one in Vietnam. And I don't know, maybe they used too large of a needle. He said it was the worst thing ever. So I had to sign for the test because he didn't want it. He said he's never going to talk to me again if I sign. But as the wife, I legally could sign. So I signed. I got out of there. I called my mom crying, and she told me there was a flu going on back home, some type of a flu we weren't aware of because we were 150 miles away. So later on, I went back and told the nurse, maybe it's the flu with the high fever. And of course, they had to give him IVs for hydration. He was dehydrated.
I was a little dehydrated, but
he was better. But that was our first clue. But then again, we didn't have anything until he had a reoccurrence. 30 years later, he was working out by Vandenberg Air Force Base. The hills here are very green in the springtime when we have a lot of rain. So it looks like Vietnam. And a Chinook, a helicopter flew into the base, which normally we don't have many helicopters. And there just happened to be some Hmong people that had immigrated to that area.
Hmong are the native Vietnamese. They were there before the Vietnamese people occupied Vietnam. And they have a very distinctive language. And there was several hundred of them that got out of Vietnam when we pulled out, and they got a little community near Vandenberg Air Force Base in a little town called Lompoc. And I was substitute teaching, and I heard some of the adult Hmong people coming to pick up their kids or something. And just hearing that language, and then the Chinook,
he was back in
I was
Vietnam.
back in Vietnam, about a school district, school ground, and I'm going nuts. And it's, this is decades later. So all I can say is I recommend, if you get a chance, look up Veterans Breakfast Club magazine and subscribe to that, at least online. And you'll see a lot of other stories. One of her friends that she's met it through writing, Laura, I think is her name, right?
Right, Laura.
Laura's got an article in the current issue that's out right now.
I think it was the old issue,
Or
but
the issue
we
before
could
this
send
one.
that to you. But so what happened is another coincidence. I get a journal from the Physical Therapy Association, and I always read it. And I had just read in a journal about this traumatic stress disorder in Vietnam veterans. And I saved the article. They have like a silhouette of a soldier, carrying a rifle. And when I read that article, and when this happened, I got the article out. I said, this is you. All of these symptoms you're having, this is what's wrong with you. And they had given us the 800 number of the veterans VA, and we were able to get help. We had a county veterans office here at that time, and we were able to get him the specialist counselor who told us only 2% of Vietnam veterans he felt ever got counseling because they didn't have specialists in it.
That's why they end up as homeless drunks.
Yeah,
because
or
they medicate with alcohol.
They get divorced. Their wives
And
can't
the
be around
wife
them.
can't put up with it because she has no medical training. And my brother, bless his heart, the late Dr. Nicholas Wagener, he was telling me, like from the second week I was back, he says, Bill, you need to get counseling. You need to get some counseling. The problem was there wasn't anybody trained in it at that time. But my brother recognized that the fun-loving, easy-laughing William Wagner was gone, and there's this angry monster occupying the same body. But my brother recognized it right
Well,
away.
he was so nervous when he came home, and he'd been to Thailand, so he bought these rings.
Oh yeah, the rings.
And
I had
he
a lot
would-
of gold
He would
rings,
go like this with his fingers, and they would go click, 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 click. And
constantly clicking Corinne, because as long as I could hear the clicks, I knew I was conscious and alive.
and awake, like if
And
he
awake.
was awake, like
I
in
was
the guard
afraid of
tower.
falling asleep and getting shot while I'm on guard duty.
That, and then he would stroke. He had a mustache, and he was constantly stroking his mustache. And we would tell him, "You're stroking your mustache again." He wasn't
I'm
even
doing it again.
he wasn't
I
even
don't
aware
have a
of it.
mustache.
But that's why his brother said, "You need to get counseling," and we did. But it wasn't the right
It
time.
wasn't a right time.
Yes,
So-
yes.
Help.
After that, Dr. Decker helped him identify his problem. We applied for disability through the veterans. And the first time he didn't get it because he wouldn't address anything that happened to him in Vietnam causing this problem. He talked about what happened before Vietnam. So of course the VA denied it.
Yeah.
So I
My mother used to beat me with a belt
well,
when I
that
was a
was
child.
part of his
And
post-traumatic
I'd rather
stress.
talk about that than Vietnam.
So
So they
anyways,
denied me at first.
when
But
I read over the denial, I said, well, you guys didn't do it right. You have to, now you have to reapply and explain what were your stressors in Vietnam. Apparently, the Army didn't communicate with the VA, or the records were all lost. They didn't even have records that he'd been there. So we had saved
yeah,
all
isn't that
these
something?
records.
They lost my records and I hadn't been to Vietnam.
I think this is gonna be a
Right.
very good, history tool for anyone, so the people like me, people that we didn't live that, that experience, your living story, and also to see the other side, not only people like William, the soldiers deserve, but also the civilians, the white spouses and children, all the suffering that you people, experienced back in the day. And what a beautiful treasury to have, the actual letters, because that was the feeling was, and that time is different. I remember this, let me pretend to write something similar. Never is gonna be the same. The actual feeling living back in the day and then nowadays. And anyone who's watching this interview, who's interested to make a movie, let us know, because this story has to be in the screen and cinemas. My friends from United Kingdom call cinemas, or movie theaters, we usually call, has to be spread. And also, I think it's going to educate the society to appreciate and give respect to all veterans, no matter which part of the world. Because thanks to you, thanks to the relatives who's been supporting them, and thanks to you, you're giving protection to our countries.
Thank you. And I would like to make one last point, if I could.
Sure, of course.
Something I learned in high school about history is history tends to repeat itself. And this book, when this happened, it was like 55 years ago. And when I was writing it, I was seeing so much similarity to 2020. When something happened 50 years ago, the same thing, history is repeating itself. And we should learn from history. We should learn not to repeat the same mistakes. Otherwise, we
Exactly.
just keep repeating the same mistakes. So that's why I really tried to include as much historical as I could. And I think as you continue reading the book, you're going to see what I'm talking about.
Yes,
You
of
say,
course.
well, that
Yes.
same thing just happened like a couple years ago. And anyway, so that's
There
the
you go. Beautiful.
got it.
I wanted you to see the cover of this
Oh,
issue of the Veterans Breakfast
Uh-huh.
Club
Uh-huh.
magazine. Carole keeps giving them away, so I had one hidden in my car that she couldn't give away.
Well, there's a good article in there about an American veteran who went back to Vietnam and visited with a Vietnamese soldier.
Yeah, there's a
Yes.
lot of good
Good
articles
articles in there.
in that
And they
magazine.
also have a Zoom presentation on
And it's not-
Monday nights.
And it's Monday nights at what time?
It's 4 o'clock here.
4 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. That'd
I'll
be,
send you the link to the
be
next
6 o'clock
veteran.
your time.
Yes.
I'll
please.
send you a link to the Zoom meeting for the Veterans Breakfast Club. But he has some he lets the veterans talk. He does. His
Yeah, he
name is
doesn't-
Todd.
You hardly hear him talk at all.
And-
It's just the veterans talking about their situation.
And we've been invited to be on his Zoom. We don't have the date yet, but when we do, I'll send you the link.
Yes, please, because I can get a guest. Even I'm focusing with the arts, but I think also it will be good we have a session called Conversations like this one. And then for people, to really learn and appreciate those people are still alive, and they can share what actually happens and give, that, to build that, how can I say that, consideration and feeling to understand them, to understand you.
These are
I will
readers.
send you one. Okay, we'll
These are-
sign it.
These are
Oh, thank
proofreaders'
you.
So
copies.
don't worry about paying for it. We'll send you.
Yeah,
a
we'll
book.
send
Oh,
you a
thank you so
copy.
much for giving. I will be recommended to my contacts, and I'm pretty sure that a lot of people that love history and people that wants to learn more about what happened in Vietnam. Yes, as soon as they ask me, I will forward the information to you as well. And thank you so much, Carole, for your kind gift. That's an honor for me and my husband. And definitely looking forward to speak with you with your development of your screenplay and your projects to see this in film. And I will be sharing this interview about the book with my contacts to see. You never know. I'm pretty sure people start, let's make this as a movie. So just preserve all, the recognition, because your hard work is gonna be paid off. Thank you so much.